Robin Palanker and Janet Klein are here, and Renee Petropoulos and Guido Garrettson are here from Southern Where do you want us to sit? Where would you like to sit? I'll sit here. Where did you sit in the middle? Okay. Yes. And here's the pillow.
Are we inquiring the price? Are we inquiring
the price? Yeah, it's a limited edition of $50 to $150.
Nice.
Sorry.
No, that's good. That's good. Looks really cool.
Thank you so much, Nano and Yuchi, for being with us. Now is another legendary artist from LA, and Yuchi is an artist and filmmaker and rising star. So yeah, pay attention to what she's up to. And I invited them to be in conversation with Susan because they're filmmakers, and yeah, I really appreciate your being here. And maybe we'll start. Sorry, the first question requires a little vulnerability. But yeah, tell me about your mothers. What's your mother or another female ancestor that you would like to talk about? What is their creative influence in your work? Who wants to start?
Well, I already think I answered that question. I think it's answered.
Okay, I'll go ahead and go. Thank you so much, Susan. Such a pleasure.
Yeah, we're all meeting.
We're all, yeah, it's such a pleasure to be in touch with your work, and just really joyous to see sort of your care and attention to these ideas. So thank you so much. Yeah. I also had a very strong relationship with my mom, and she also, gosh, so much happened. She really influenced me as an artist. I always say my mom was an installation artist. She didn't call herself an artist, but you know, she always had these projects going on, and she painted the ceiling of our house different colors on each ceiling in each room. And there's a story about my mom I really love telling. This kind of tells you about our relationship, which is when I was a kid, my mom came to the elementary school and stood at the door looking very stern, and the teacher opened a note and looked at me and said, "Oh, you're going to the dentist today." And I was like, "Oh," and I left the classroom, and I was really upset, and I got in the car, and my mom turned to me and she said, "We're going shopping!" So I was the youngest of six, and I was kind of my mom's sidekick, you know.
Aww.
And so yeah, really wonderful. Yeah.
I mean, I identify as well as, I think, being my mom's sidekick in many ways. My mom is an artist, and I think she's the one that does pretty well in her field. So I definitely grew up, I think someone said in the Tell Me About Your Mother film that art is like religion in their household, and I very much identify with that experience. And I don't know if my parents wanted me to become artists, but I feel like their art and the language that's within their medium has influenced everything that I do today.
Thank you for sharing that. And actually a few of the films, it was mentioned, you know, like the challenges of being a woman artist, and I think that because you belong to different generations, there are different perspectives and different challenges. Would you like to share a little bit about that, Susan?
What, do we have all day? It's too general. I don't think I can answer that question. I think it's too, you know, I mean, what I recently, when you saw those in that pencil test piece, when you saw the images of me semi-nude with the mink coat, that comes out of a recent piece I did in 2022, which is What Becomes a Legend Most, and it's a takeoff on a mid-century ad campaign for black glamour Mink Coats, which featured older celebrities like Lauren Bacall, for example. And I used that when I had heard someone, Monica Moioli actually told me that my name came up, and this young curator said, oh, she's such a, Susan Mogul, she's a legend, and you think, well, what has that done for me? The curator hasn't called me up for a show. But I don't get upset about things, really. I try to satirize situations. So the piece that I did called, Susan Mogul, What Becomes a Legend Most, and then the subtext, the not subtext, it's the line at the bottom is Susan Mogul, the septuagenarian, anticipates her first solo museum show. So that's how I have dealt with, the challenges of being, a female artist and then an older woman. But now, women of my generation are getting slightly hip. And I was in a 5-woman show of women of my generation in New York, 70s women artists, because now they can historicize us.
A living legend.
Yeah, you're another legendary artist now.
Oh,
What do you think?
yeah. That means old, right?
Iconographic.
Okay. Well, thank you. I remember having a distinct feeling when I was a kid that I was looking in the mirror myself, and I said to I think that probably all people go through something like this of when you realize that you're present in your body. And I said to myself, you're looking out of these eyes, and you're in this body. And I think that it was kind of, I've never really, I know that I'm a woman in this lifetime, but I feel like, and so I feel like I make work from that place, sort of like, I know that I'm a, queer, Chicana woman in this lifetime, and that's how how I'm perceived, and how I walk through the world. And so I often make work with that in mind, sort of like, well, I can't sort of sidestep this personhood that I am and the way that I fit into like the framework. And
Well, that's
so,
what I think.
yeah.
I think that's one of the things that makes our work. I mean, on the outside doesn't look that similar, but we're
Yeah.
embracing who we are
Yes, yeah,
and not, trying to be something else.
yeah. Well, I have often tried to be something else, actually. No. But in that way of like taking on a persona or something like that within the context of work. But I think that I had the advantage of also being a kid in the 70s, and it sort of being that time of free to be you and me, and you could do anything you want, kid. And so I didn't. I would say I feel more like, I don't know, I feel like now there's like kind of in a weird way like almost more misogyny than I felt as like a young artist, in the 90s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. So it's but I kind of just ignore it and just carry on.
Yuchi, what's your perspective on this? And I also want to invite both of you to ask each other questions if you have any. But I want to also make the note that your work is also autobiographical in many ways, and there's also performance to the camera. So how do you balance those things and your identity?
I think I've, never quite thought specifically about the question of the feminine identity within my work because of my immigration experience since a really young age. I've always thought more about the diasporic experience when it comes to defining my work, but I think inherently, for a long time, there was always this feeling of, I love being a girl, but I don't know if I like being a woman so much. And, you know? But I think as I get older, my mom's also an artist, and talking to her about making art, there's this feeling of growing into my womanhood. And I think learning or looking at her, as I can feel more in sort of this shared understanding, plight, and language. I feel this, I guess, you know, growing into the feminine and a little more, which I think is just, as we're saying, something intrinsic. It's not necessarily you have to be like, I'm, you know, making this because of this perspective, but it is just a part of me that I can't really, you know, separate.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel it's a process.
Yeah, definitely.
And I also want to ask more about being vulnerable in your work and connecting the personal. And there's a lot of instances where I think the three of you also take like other personas, but all of them, and I think one of the artists also talked about it. They're facets of yourselves. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? About taking, you know,
About being vulnerable?
being vulnerable and sort of taking other,
Putting yourself out
yeah.
there.
Mhm.
Well, I think that, I mean, I think a good part of, I think I came to LA in 1973 to be part of the feminist art program, and that was an environment where, you know, being yourself, you know, being as, anything goes. Anything goes. So I was in an environment that gave you permission to, it invited you, it demanded that you know, you be yourself and you be vulnerable and you take off your clothes and all of that. And then it sort of, and storytelling. So it just opened, so I never, because, you know, if you're in an environment where that's so accepted and encouraged and invited and celebrated. Actually, I had the tape, one of the tapes I'm very well known for, so 73 is Dressing Up. You saw that at the beginning of the pencil test. And that was really celebrated with my little feminist art cohort at Cal Arts. And then Judy brings me and Laurel Click and Suzanne Lacey to UC Santa Barbara and we show the tapes in this class. And they're all like, you know, taken aback. And it was just like, you know, there was that world and then there was this other world because we were sort of in this little bubble. But already the, I don't know, the ice had been broken and I just continued. And didn't care what other people thought. So it was very easy for me in a certain way. Yeah. I didn't think that I was being vulnerable. Like people have often said, oh, you're so brave, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't occur to me.
Yuchi?
I think what you said about like you didn't feel like you were vulnerable, that's so interesting to me. I think in my own journey making personal art, in the beginning, it felt like I'm making personal art because it's the only thing I know that I can vouch for sure. And I think as time went on, there was this feeling of, sometimes I think performing vulnerability within my art, but it becomes this inseparable thing where my life is my art, and so what is the balance to keep, I think, between showing vulnerability versus not. But I think something that's helpful for me is with my mother, I think this is something we really connect through. And with art, there's sort of this spiritual world that's open up where I think because we don't get to spend a lot of time together physically, this sort of becomes this medium where we can come to understand each other, even if there's not as much real concrete knowing in real life.
I've always been a manipulative person. So I think vulnerability is another way to manipulate your audience. And I think artists are manipulators, kind of by nature. I mean, whether we're manipulating objects or we're manipulating other people to make work with us, it's kind of out of desperation and necessity in a way. I mean, it's kind of like community building through manipulation in a way. But I feel like for me, you know, I'm really glad I didn't grow up in the era of social media. And when I say grow up, I mean like in my 20s, right? That I was able to experiment and be somewhat free in these performance art spaces that were pretty vulnerable, but also I was with a small community of people, and we were working through a lot of issues, you know, abuse issues and otherwise. And I think that we were really working through some crazy stuff, and I even feel like not only was I vulnerable, I was actually putting myself through abusive scenarios through performance, right? Like a kind of self-abuse on display. And I think that that I'm really glad that, I mean, I don't have control over all that material, but I do control quite a bit of that material still. And, you know, that work was actually never meant to be seen by a white public. That work was, you know, might have been for 12 people or 30 people in the room, and everybody who knew each other and who'd probably gone to somebody else's show, you know, last week or something. So the work that developed there that was very vulnerable was really within the context of a small, you know, working artist community, I guess you could say.
That's really interesting. Can you all talk a little bit about community and what it means to you? Because all of you feature, you know, colleagues, friends, and it's not only you. And as part of the videos, Yuchi even has Sim versions of her friends and family. So what is the role that they play beyond, you know, being part of the film? You say, you know, that you made those works for them, and then Susan, your videos, two of them say that they're for your mother, but also like who's your as your collaborators, do you feel like your collaborators are your public too, your audience, your main audience?
Well, there's a kind of timestamp on your work in a way, you know, like you're working with people who are maybe close to you or you have communication with already, and then it's like you're creating these archives in a way.
Yeah, I guess I don't, you know, I don't think of like I have this community. Things come, I mean, I've made projects with other people and it's happened organically. I lived in Highland Park for 12 years and I made a film about my relationship with my neighbors and merchants in Highland Park. And that was something that just evolved where I, you know, started to think about, well, why was I living in this particular neighborhood for 12 years where I was very different from most of my you know, the neighbors and people, everyday interactions I had. And then, you know, then at one point it occurred to me that, you know, that a lot of my cohorts were all childless. You know, and it's sort of like, I don't think, oh, I have this community or that community. I don't think about, to be honest with you, I don't think about who's my audience. I don't think, those aren't things that I really dwell on. I think about what am I, you know, like an anecdote, someone tells me about, oh, Susan Mogul, you're a legend, and that gives me an idea. Or even the thing about Childless Woman, I was at a conference about Jewish autobiography and film and video, a very small conference at USC. And at one point, I said, gee, and there was like 6 of us filmmakers. And I said, gee, everyone's making film about family, but nobody's making family. And then this one woman, who is a film festival director from San Francisco, Janice Plotkin, she came up to me, that's a great, why don't you make a film about Giles? You an anecdote, you have an interchange with somebody, and then that gives me an idea of something that I want to do. So it's not like, that's all I have to say.
Yuchi?
I feel like for me, there is a specific audience and community because of the diasporic nature of my work. I think that I first and foremost make work for people who share similar immigration experiences. And in that sense, I would say my experience abroad in America made me believe in community because I've needed a found family here in order to fully have my life here. And I think that's something that really separated my mother and I in our knowledge because especially coming from Chinese background, your family is supposed to be your community first and foremost. And I think there's always this tension between, your born family and this family you found for yourself here. And I think the Barren Woman piece for me is also very relatable at this specific age as my friends and I are going to our 30s. And I think, there's this sense of like, are we able to maintain this sense of family and community we found? Or are we ultimately doomed to follow the nuclear family path and sort of become isolated? And so, yeah, I think this is something to think about.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm sorry I haven't seen your work. I'm really excited to look it up and see what you're up to. But I think I realized, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago, I realized that I had done a series of films that were sort of working through my ideas, but with kind of whoever I happened to be around. So my neighbors or, performance art community, different people within within arm's reach kind of thing that I could drag in to my work. And, I've done a lot of sort of solo work, partly because I'm available and I work for free on my own projects. And so I think that was sort of the impetus for doing that kind of work. And then when I wanted to sort of tell a bigger story or use with more bodies or more people, I kind of figure out a way to map it onto people that are around me, and often working with non-actors, that kind of thing. And I realized that I've done that all along the way, and then I have several films that are now a kind of mapping of like my community in that moment. So that's been kind of fun for me to realize that there has been sort of a different kind of underlying method that's been crossing over with my ideas. But yeah, I'll leave it there.
Should we open to the audience? Yes, I just want to ask if anyone in the audience has a question.
Especially questions for Susan.
Andrea?
So you, Susan, you know that like your early films were like I used to go to the CalArts library and obsess over what's the vibrator piece called?
Take off.
Take off.
Take off.
And then dress up. I've always wanted to know why you always do these really.
Can people hear Andrea?
You always do these amazing gestures. I think you're really creative with filmmaking. In dress up, you're eating corn nuts. That is the wildest thing for me. I will remember it forever. I love that. Why corn nuts? I've always wanted to ask you.
I was just asked that by a film scholar. Actually, Andrea wants to know why in dressing up, which you saw a little clip of, where I come out naked and then I'm eating corn nuts while I talk about bargain hunting with my mother. And
while you're naked at the beginning.
Yeah, while I'm naked, of course. and basically, what I remember is just that I thought that shopping was me talking about one item after the other. The bargain hunting was very obsessive, and then I wanted to, and I don't know if, and also I decided I wanted to underline the obsessiveness by doing something else that was obsessive, and so therefore I was kind of munching on corn nuts.
That's brilliant.
That's very simple.
Yeah.
Thank you. Another question?
or comment.
Or comment?
Any comments? This is my first showing of Tell Me About Your Mother. No comments or questions about it? Nothing? Yes, there's somebody there.
Hi, I'm interested in the gap between the filming and, because it was filmed mostly around 2011, it said, when your mother was still alive, and then you finished making the film in 2024, and I was kind of curious about your reflecting back on seeing footage that you'd taken in 10 years before, 12 years before, and if it was just, if it was a series of conversations you had to think about for a long time, or if it just...
Well, what happened was I was filming a lot of, in 2011, 2012, I was interviewing a number of women about feminism and then also their mothers and different things about feminism. I realized what I was most interested in was talking about the relationship to the mothers. And I was shooting women in 2011 and 2012, and then my mother decided to move. And then I put that material aside and then just focused on the film and then other aspects, and I did other installations that were also related to my relationship to my mother. And then last year and a half ago, I decided to go back to that material, and I found that it still held great interest to me. And I think that they pair kind of well together, the mom's move, and I think they kind of play off of one another pretty well, I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
You'd have to tell me.
Yeah.
Those letters are wild.
What?
The letters from your mom are wild.
Yeah.
She, as she said in Mom's Move, she gave me material.
Copyrighted. Do we have another question from the audience? In the back on this side.
There was a moment where it was mentioned you taking it further
Yes.
with your mother, and I have a moment like that myself where there's almost like a level of guilt associated where you feel, or I felt at least in some way responsible for her not having taken it further. She had like reflected to a sibling of mine on one of my first shows. I feel a level of regret, and I always wanted someone personally responsible that she had not been able to take it further. I don't know, it's one of the first things I've ever heard it noted, this sort of tension between like taking it, this idea and running with it. Do you know what I mean? I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on.
Well, I think what's interesting is that, I don't know if I'm responding to you directly, but in a lot of, my mother's from most of the, except for Jemima's mother, who's my generation, but she also comes from a different class background. As you saw that she hadn't gone to college, and she clearly comes from a working class background. All the other moms were from the generation before the second wave feminists. So there's that tension of, middle class educated women who then graduated from college and became housewives and moms, and so I think that like Weeba talks of, that comes up where Weeba is talking. Wouldn't you say that, Weeba?
Yeah.
She addresses, Weeba?
Absolutely, she was a housewife, but she was trying to be a housewife and an artist at the same time.
Yeah, and then one of the things that I identified so much with Weeba was that when she talks about her mother switching from being a painter to doing the needlework, I thought this is so similar to my mother being a photographer, because with the camera, like you say, she could take on the plane, she could take the needlework anywhere she wanted. My mother could take the camera anywhere she wanted, and also the subject matter, and I think the best photographs my mother took were of her kids. So it was, she made it part of her life rather than isolating. And I think that, but that generation of women, didn't have the opportunities of the, second wave feminists, and then your generation has more advantage,
Sure, yeah.
you have just, terms of what expectations,
Yeah, absolutely. We would like to know, there's
One
a
question, yeah, this is a little more technical thing, but I normally do not enjoy dissolves in a film. And you did it beautifully. And you did it more in that one film than you normally do in your work. And to me, of course, because it's all interwoven in your storytelling. But tell me about how you got there for that.
well, Lindsay's an editor, and I edit all my own work, and I've always been against dissolves.
Us both of us.
I've
I
always
love the hard
been
cut. Love the hard cut. Yes.
against dissolves. But what I did, because I was working with photographs, and because I was working with black and white photographs, the photograph that I went in and out of, it was very, very careful, so they became one image, and it was like the two of them would actually work together, and they became like one photograph. So, it had to do with, and I only did it with the black and white images, because that's the only kind of images it would work. And then those images had to be very specific, have a kind of it was basically graphic design, actually. And I very much made them incredibly slow. Yeah, but I would have never anticipated doing that before, but it was also a way, because I was working with photographs more than moving footage, it was a way to give movement. Yes. Yeah. But thank you for asking that question.
I think that was something that I really loved about the piece, as well as the photograph with this almost ghost-like movement. I think it stood out so much more like memories, where photography suggesting the absence, but then, video sort of capturing it in this moment of living. And I think in the end of that film, when you talk about Diane Arbus and her ideas of photography versus movie video, it felt so much like you were looking into the way your mom looked at these photos and asking her questions and breathing life into that. So that was really beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yuchi. We would like, to have a few minutes to mingle, to have the last cookies, the last cup of tea. Oh, no more. Well,
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Susan now and Yuchi for joining us. And before we leave, can you tell us what you're up to? What's your next project, so everybody can join? Really quickly. Yeah, rapid fire. I'm in the process of editing a film right now that I shot in 1999, and I have 25 tapes. So, yeah. And anyway, it's screening on April 25th at the Museum of Motion Pictures, and it's called Skowhegan, and it's about my time as a resident at an art colony.
I'm trying to figure out a piece about my more matrilineal lineage, my grandmother and my great aunt.
I have a solo show coming up with LA Art Corps in June. It's about pandas and panda diplomacy.
Very, very good. Thank you so much. And our next program is on March 15th. It's a conversation, a virtual conversation with a group of international artists working on a mail art project. So you go on our website to register to the Zoom. It's at 11 a.m. Thank you so much for joining tonight. Thank you to the artists. Thanks, Susan.